Hello everybody, welcome back to our Spring Boot series. Today I would like to introduce you a matrix variable, which is a different way to collect values from an address. Previously we saw the use of path variable to get a value from the path of an address, like this. So we provide here a placeholder that we write in the address and it will be injected in this parameter, and then we can use it, for instance, to get a user. Another approach was using the request parameters, and with request parameters like this, it's the same concept as this one. So we are receiving values, but now we don't change here the path. We just append this kind of data. We put a question mark and then we provide key values separated by this symbol and here in the middle. And usually these scenarios, it's common when we want to filter things, but use the same concept as this one with an annotation path variable, but in this case we use request parameter, and you can customize if it's required or not. Maybe you want a different name from the variable here, or maybe you can even provide a default value if this parameter was not provided in the address, and then we can use the data inside our method. The third method that I want to present today, it's using matrix variable. On a first approach is quite similar to this one. Imagine that we have these users search and we have this placeholder which is the first different, and it's the same concept as here. So we can put any value here and you can capture like this using path variable inclusive. But now we use matrix variables. What's the difference between matrix variable and request parameters? If you look into a possible address, you can see here that I'm using this one, user search user, which means that the value of this group will be user, but then we are using semicolons here. And then we have the key value, semicolon, key value, semicolon, key value. The main idea is that this set of attributes after this word user will be associated with this path variable here, user, meaning that the value user here, this group, will contain these attributes inside. So what is the advantage? Looking from this perspective, there is no advantage because it's similar to this one. But now let's see a different example. Imagine that we want an address like this one. So we have products, laptops, and then we want to choose the color, the price, and the brand. But we also want to filter by accessories like this. And the accessories also contains an attribute color. That this scenario will be impossible to implement using a request parameter because there will be ambiguity here on the color. There will be two colors and we couldn't get the right name here to collect the color. And the matrix variable can resolve that because we can create a pattern like this one, meaning you can create a pattern like this category here, put category here. We don't need to provide this. Maybe this is putting too much. I just put it as an example, but to be more accurate here, I'll just remove this. It's not necessary, let's say it this way. And now we have here this access category. It's a different path variable. So we have two path variables, this one and this one, okay? And we have this color. It's like as we write something like accessories.color and laptops.color. But we have this scenario, we have two different path variables here. And now we define in the code something like this. So we put path variable category and path variable, let's give it a name, the same name as here, for the variable here, access category, okay? And now, rather than specifying each one of the attributes with the matrix variable and the names of the attributes like ID, username, name, we can collect all of them under a specific name. In our case, we say that it's the path var, and the path var here, it's the category that we are seeing, and we provide a map, and Spring Boot will collect all the attributes after that path variable, okay, and we'll put here the key and the value, and the same for access category. So this color will be on this map, and this color will be on this map, so there will be no conflict, and then we can use these variables inside our code. In our example, we don't need the matrix variable, but I didn't want to complicate too much. That's why I provided this example here. In our case, we'll be using matrix variables, but simpler, with just a simple path variable, just one, but we'll see that we can get these attributes under the group, and we can use them using the semicolon on the address. But there is one thing that you should know about the matrix variable. By default, they don't work on Spring Boot. Why? Because Spring Boot, when it starts, it removes, or no, not okay, when it starts, there's some configuration that by default every address that is received by the REST controller will clean the semicolons, and we have to disable that. And to disable that, we have to go to create a class that implements this interface here, and it should have this annotation configuration. So when you have a class with this configuration, Spring Boot, not book, will look into the class here, and we'll see if there exists something that is useful for him. And since we are implementing this web configure, Spring Boot, I don't know what I'm saying, book, Spring Boot will inject here this configure when it calls this method. And when it inject this configure, we can change the behavior of this configure. This configure, by the way, is web MVC, which means that allow us to change configurations related with the web. And here we are using the URL path helper, which contains a specific method set remove semicolon content false. So we are telling Spring Boot to say, please don't remove the semicolon content. So it will allow those addresses. So Spring Boot will contains a lot of configurations like this that we will be implementing in the future. Because let's say 80% of the Spring Boot work, contains all the features that we need for the most popular projects or common user scenarios. But the rest of the 20% requires some advanced studying to override these kind of things. But at the end of the day, if you want to use this, just copy paste this code, and you don't need nothing else. It's just this code. If this class is under the package of this class here, the backend server application, it will be automatically collected at the start of Spring Boot, and the Spring Boot will do all the work for you to customize or to override the configuration about removing the semicolons. So at the end of the day, just copy paste this code and it should work out of the box. So let's see this working. So now we have our users here. Okay, but our address, let's see our address here. It's users search and then a placeholder, which is our group. Okay, so let's see users, not this symbol, this, okay, something with my keyboard, search, and let's say user, for instance, and when we click, we see all users. But now let's use one of these matrix variables. We have these 5 that we can use. Okay, so let's start with a semicolon, say ID equals 3, and it's filtering the ID by 3. I will explain why is it filtering. It's a simple code, but for now, the thing that I want to show you, it's working. So the ID here is receiving the value 3. Okay, now let's change and use department, for instance. Department, let's say sales, department, something. I'm sure I have something wrong here. Department, okay, it was a typo. So department equals sales. Department is this variable here. So, and we can see that department of these 3 users is sales. But if we want, we can filter more and say, for instance, add another semicolon and say, let's say email equals, and I'll just use this right part for finance, so we don't expect to see this external. And again, and it was filtered by these 2. So this department, this email, it's working. it's being passed to it. So we can do the same for the other properties. You can combine any way we want. So when we receive this information, the ones that we provide will receive the value, the other ones will be null. I'm just creating a user here in the CLZ. This user will be used as a filter, not as an entity, and I implement this method filter users. And what it does is just go to the database, collect all the users from there, and now it checks if it just filters by ID, username, name, email, and department. If it's null, everything is okay. I'll just return. But if any of these properties contains a value, the filter will be applied. So if it's an ID or username, it will apply the equals, meaning that the users that were collected from database should match the user that was passed here on the perimeter. But for instance, for the name, I'm using a contains, so it searches for keywords or specific strings. And for the email, that's why it's working, not provide the full email. I'm just using the ends with. If you look into the mail, it's a nice trick, because when you use the ends with, we can choose from the right to the left how much do you want to filter the email. If you want to collect all the emails that belong to a specific domain, you just write this. If you want all the domains from a root domain, you can just write fin and so on. Okay, and then the department is also using equals. That's the only code that I have that is being called here, and the result you can see here. Meaning that if you can come here and say where the name equals, let's say 5, and you can see that the name here I'm using as the number 5, so it's working. You can change, you can put all of them, you can just choose one, you can remove all of them. That's one of the things that you can do with the matrix variable. Of course, you can do it also with the request parameter, but you cannot repeat, let's say, the same name for the specific properties in request parameter, and something you can do, as we saw with matrix variables, if you provide more than one path variable and you define a multi-value map. So we can, at the end of the day, replace all of these lines with just one of these entries. I only avoid it because there is an integer here, and I didn't want to work with casts and things like that. But of course, you can replace all of this code with just this line here, one of these lines and one path variable here, so you can get the values and group all of things and work as a map. But usually I prefer to work with the specific information. It avoids a lot of issues because a lot of things will be hidden, and yeah, it can be complicated to troubleshoot when there is any issue on the application. So this is what I wanted to show you about the matrix variable. So now we have 3 ways to receive data in a REST controller: path variable, request parameter, and matrix variable. Should you use the matrix variable? Avoid it, because it's not, let's say, fully standard. Sometimes it's necessary. I saw in some public and well-known frameworks, Spring Boot contains this feature, so it's quite popular. But if you can implement it using path variables and request parameters, it's 100% standard. Everyone knows about it. Go ahead with it. If it's not possible, you have a specific scenario that you cannot implement using the 2 other approach. Okay, that's when the matrix variable time arrives, and you should use it for that particular problem. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you in my next video. Be free to subscribe, share with your friends, comment, propose other lessons. I will be doing additional videos about Spring Boot.